Hi, I'm Lorna Baker from LMB Procurement, and I provide procurement and bid writing support services to organisations focused on the public sector. This is the third in a series of mini videos looking behind the scenes of a real life tender evaluation. And this episode, I'll be looking at credit checks, which are a key part of how we evaluate suppliers during the procurement process. It can be shrouded in a bit of mystery, so I thought that I would just go through what an actual credit check review looks like. At this point, it's worthwhile pointing out that I'm using a Dun& Bradstreet credit reference agency because that's the one chosen by this client. They are in my experience, the most commonly used one across the public sector, but there are other credit reference agencies, and I'll talk a little bit about those towards the end of the video. It's important that we assess financial health of bidders so that we can ensure that they can actually carry out the contract reliably and without putting themselves or us and the project at risk. So the first piece of information that I'm looking for is going to be the key data. As you can see from this slide, this is a quick overview of what this credit reference looks like. It shows that there's quite a high credit recommendation here. There's no insolvency indicators, and generally it's all in the green. So we're quite happy with this, but let's dig a little bit deeper to see what the details are. My first page that I like to look at is the failure score. And this indicates whether or not the business is likely to still be working and in business in the next 12 months. The higher the score, the better. So in this case, we've got a 92. That's a really good score. And I've got quite a high level of confidence that in 12 months' time, we wouldn't be having to retender this service because the business had gone out of business. There's a number of reasons for this, and it includes things like the length of establishment, how many directors there are, any insolvency, and things like that. The next score that I like to look at is called a delinquency score. And this is a predictive risk score, estimating the chances that the business might become severely late in making payments. In this case, it's a 75. And as you can see, they've commented that the business is paying its suppliers in an inconsistent manner. So there seems to have been a drop around April or May, and we'll have a little bit of a look in a moment as to why that might be. The next thing that we have is unique to Dun & Bradstreet, and that is this review, which is of historical data. So it isn't predictive like the previous one. It's actually based on how this supplier has been paying its contracts and its invoices. In this case, as you can see, around the same time as the previous slide, there's been a drop from the mid 70s down to the high 60s in how they've paid. However, looking in the past, it looks like this might be something that they've done before. They've recovered and then they've dropped again. So either this could be that there's a time of year when this organisation is trying to make themselves seem more cash rich, or there could be a particular incident that's happened. They're generally paying 17 days beyond terms, which it's still in the green, but from a procurement perspective in the public sector, we are obligated to ensure that the supply chain are paying in a timely manner. And as such, it is something that I would be having a conversation with them about if they're successful on this tender. Not all organisations will have this score available. So if you were to run a credit check on LMB Procurement, my business, this information would simply be unavailable because of the size of my organisation. However, the reality is that my scores would be over 80 because 80 days is that you're paying on time, higher than 80 is that you're paying early, and lower than 80 is that you're paying late. So in my case, I generally pay invoices when I receive them because otherwise I would forget to do them, frankly. So I would be, I would be very low risk here if they measured it, but they don't because of the size of my organisation. So it's important to note that just because this information isn't available, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be used against you by anybody in procurement. And procurement colleagues do know that this score is generally more useful for larger organisations. And it can be used helpfully to encourage larger organisations to pay their supply chain. Investigation into why there was a drop in April. We can now see that there were some court judgments here in April. I have had a look in a little bit more detail at this one, and I'm actually not too concerned about these. So it is worth noting that whilst there can be a drop in figures, and on those tables there evidently was, there can be reasons. So I'm not too concerned about this now that I've satisfied myself. I'm not going to share all the details of them because I just don't think it's necessary for this video. The next score that I look at is the credit limit recommendation. And as you can see in this instance, this organisation is large and they've got a high credit recommendation. The reason I look at this is that if an organisation is bidding for a £100,000 contract, but their credit limit recommendation is only 25,000, I want to understand how they're planning to fund the difference. And that's particularly important when I'm thinking about how they're going to pay their suppliers, pay their staff, buy materials, etc. If the gap's significant, then I might ask my finance colleagues to also review certain information and ask for example, things like management accounts and updated balance sheets, or even evidence of working capital. This is the kind of information that they may be asking for, and I think it's important to see whether or not there's going to be enough gross margin to realistically deliver the contract. Do they have positive net assets? Are they reliant on short-term debt? Those sorts of things. The business ratios are important because it helps me to understand if they're liquid enough to pay their short-term obligations and how heavily financed they are. So all of this information I would pass over to a finance colleague for them to assess and for them to confirm if they were happy for us to work with this organisation. Finally, I did mention that I would talk about different credit reference agencies. They are not all the same, and some are going to make you as a bidder look more or less risky depending on who they are. So Dun & Bradstreet are certainly one of the more commonly used ones across the whole of the public sector. They're generally quite cautious in their assessments. They do have some really helpful information with regards to failure and delinquency scoring. Experian are another very commonly used organisation. They have really great UK business data and a well-balanced risk model. Credit Safe are more commonly used in the private sector, but they often provide higher credit limits, which is obviously more favourable to smaller businesses. And you might find Credit Safe being used in local authorities a little bit more, certainly not exclusively, but a little bit more because they acquired an organisation called Graydon, I think in 2022. And they had really good sector specific insights. So if you see Credit Safe then and you're an SME, then you might be feeling very cheerful. If you are thinking that you could ask for a specific credit agency to be used, then that won't work because in order to ensure fairness, all the bidders will need to be evaluated against the same credit reference agency. So what advice do I have for bidders? You need to know what your credit profile is saying about you, and don't be afraid to just explain a few bits if there is anything in there that you need to do. Address any discrepancies or gaps in your submission. And if you're growing quickly or recovering from a bad year, then you just need to let the procurement team know and explain how you're planning to fund this work and how you will deliver it. What the procurement team are looking for is reassurance that it is safe to give you this contract. They're not looking to punish you for not being big enough at this moment in time. One of the most important things that you can do to ensure that your credit reference is good is to file your accounts on time. And so even just one late filing can significantly impact your credit rating. For procurement colleagues, if you are watching this, and I don't know if you are, if you see credit scores, remember that they're helpful, but they're not necessarily definitive, and they should be used alongside actual financials. So bringing finance colleagues in to request some clarification is always really helpful. And that's especially true when working with small suppliers, because we do owe them the courtesy of a fair and informed assessment. So this is my sort of final bit on credit references. I know that it can feel like it's a tick box exercise and that it is a piece that you have to just get through. But it's worthwhile remembering that this is public money. We have a responsibility to spend it wisely and in a way that's accountable and proportionate and ultimately ends up delivering value for the communities that we serve. So thank you very much for watching. If CreditSafe or Experian want me to review their credit references, then I'm happy to do so in exchange probably for coffee or maybe, a branded mug or something. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next video, which will hopefully finish off due diligence and start the quality evaluations. Thank you.